Hello, welcome friends. Welcome on the barricades. This is a special day for me because I have the chance to discuss with one of the few feminists that I truly like. And I share most of her ideas, and I was very happy to see that Harriet Fraad, a renowned feminist activist and psychotherapist, accepted the invitation of being here with us today. Thank you for being here, Harriet.
I'm so glad to be here.
And we are going to discuss a lot of things. I would not dare to take much of Harriet's time, but I hope she will be able to stay with us at least until we discuss the things that we announced. And let us dive straight in. For most Eastern Europeans, and especially Romanians, that were accustomed to the image of Gloria Steinem as a feminist icon, as a very influential feminist that was the initiator of Ms.Magazine, a popular feminist magazine, and also the one who dared to go undercover to Playboy magazine and then write about it, discovering that she was a CIA agent was a little bit confusing, bizarre. Even though in the United States, the radical collective Red Stockings wrote about her collaboration with the CIA even in 1975. Now, the problem here is that you see this type of ignorance is not so bizarre when you think that Ms.Magazine is very popular today, Ms. Steinem is very popular today, but the Red Stockings collective is not so popular. So maybe it is not an excuse, but it's a very interesting thing in the history of feminism. In one of your podcasts, because Harriet co-hosts a very important podcast that is called Capitalism Hits Home, where she analyzes the way capitalism impacts our personal lives. She talked about this involvement of Steinem with the CIA, which is not interesting in itself, but it is very interesting from the point of view of the feminism that Miss Steinem promoted. Can you elaborate a little bit? When did you find out? How did you find out about it? And when it became clear that maybe Ms.Magazine was not the progressive media outlet that you hoped it to be?
Well, I found that out long ago, and I didn't find it out, though, until the 1990s, even though I started being active in 1968, in the very beginning of the second wave feminist movement. And we were very naive and class blind. And so Gloria Steinem delivered Ms.Magazine, no ads, and a very glossy magazine. And we thought, great, look what she got. We didn't say, where does the money come from for this beautiful magazine? And it came from the CIA. And so it wasn't till much later that I realized what was happening, because I read a very good book called The Great Wurlitzer. The Wurlitzer was a famous organ which you can plug music in and get different instrument tones out of it. And it was an operation of the FBI in the United States and the CIA, which put hundreds of thousands into creating a gender-only movement and cutting class out of the movement, and a race-only movement out of what was the civil rights movement, and cutting class out of that movement. And it should be noted that when Martin Luther King was killed, he had started saying it isn't only race but class. Black and white together have got to make a just America, and he was shot. The same thing happened with Malcolm X, when instead of saying blacks against whites, he said we need each other to win. We need class transformation. He too was shot. In America, it's pretty easy to get someone to shoot someone. A lot of people are armed and ready to shoot other people for money. In any case, what happened was that the movement, which began in the 60s, where women who were active against the war in Vietnam, leftist women, thought, well, wait a minute, how about us? We too have an inferior position in society. And we need to organize and rise up because we're at the bottom. Everything will come with us. Very naive, but that was our belief. And what Gloria Steinem accomplished is, instead of we will rise up and we will bring everyone with us for a class transformation of the United States, it was we will be equal in a system of the greatest inequality in the Western world. But we will be right there, having a chance to exploit other people at the top of the heap. And no position within the capitalist structure will be closed to us. We will be equal exploiters and exploited. And so corporate feminism, which is still embraced by many, the book Lean In by Sheryl Sandberg, CEO of Facebook, says women have to lean in. And she says it is possible. It is possible, if you marry the right man, to have children, to have a full career, to advance as I have. She doesn't mention that they had 9 servants, which of course makes it a lot easier.
Of course. You know what? I'm very curious. How old were you when you first started to be engaged with the feminist movement, and what were your first actions? Because in one of your podcasts, you describe yourself as one of the founding mothers of the women's liberation movement. How did it all started?
Well, from my sister, my biological sister, as well as my political sister in New York City, I was sent a magazine called Notes from the First Year of Feminism, 1967, in New York City. And it had all sorts of articles, many about, which included class awareness. And I thought, oh my God, I have to do this here in New Haven, Connecticut, where I lived. I was 24, and I thought, we've got to do this. So I called women that I knew from the Committee to End the War in Vietnam, and I got the permission from the AIM, the American Independent Movement that I had worked on, and which had given birth to the movement against the war in Vietnam and was organizing it, to use their office. And 5 of us met. We decided we're going to start that here, and we're going to bring everyone we can. And after about 2 months, we had 100 people in our meetings.
Wow, that's a lot. Were they young as you were?
Mostly they were young, and mostly they were students or young women professionals. And mostly, although not exclusively, they were white. Although the beginning of the movement in New York City included Black women. And it wasn't only bourgeois white women who were students or young professionals. But as it became more corporate feminist, and as Blacks are still even tinier a minority among the leadership in capitalism of whites, and since Black people are the poorest people in the United States, Black women opted out of our movement. But we totally believed in what we were doing, and we were very naive. And the movement evolved much more towards corporate feminism than towards the radical feminism that we believed in. And it became much more influenced by Gloria Steinem, who said, a woman needs a man like a fish needs a bicycle.
And what do you think that's problematic?
I think it's problematic because we'll never win unless we're united, and we'll never change gender and make a real revolution in gender as well as in class in every other way if we are not a united front. And slowly then, I tried to figure out what was going on. And I joined.
When you first started to see that there was something maybe wrong with this type of so-called progressive that was against men, but for the elites, as I understand. So it was against men, but somehow pro-capitalist.
Yes, I think I started seeing when I had a child how hostile it was to having children and also to transforming women's role in having children and domestic labor of bringing up children. And I started a midwifery rights movement so that we could be delivered by midwives. And I went to talk to the women's liberation movement about joining our movement for midwifery rights. And because the movement was that men should be excluded rather than we need meetings of only women because we're not quite ready to be equals with men, which is very different. They were, while I was doing my presentation, there were a lot of gay women, fine to be gay, but they were making out during the meeting, and they were not at all interested in women organizing for a different kind of childbirth and a different kind of relationship with other women as mothers. And I started to really go into it. They also had a big poster, which was funny, but ideologically, absolutely not what I believed in. They had just sent a man to the moon, the United States, at that time. And so they had a big poster of an astronaut man. And they said they sent one man to the moon. Now they can take the rest of them, right? So
it is funny, but ideologically very problematic.
It is, because we'll never win unless we're united. And also, I got interested in Marxism and started applying the Marxism that I appreciated, which is entering into the whole discussion with the idea of class. Who does the work? Who appropriates the fruits of that work? Who gets to distribute it? And I thought, oh my God, we are feudal serfs.
Yes, because you wrote a book, a very interesting one, and in the first chapter you just described the household as a feudalist.
Right. And I had written an essay before that, which was the beginning of my thinking that way, and it was called "For Every Knight in Shining Armor, There's a Castle Waiting to be Cleaned." Because the whole romantic ideal that you fall into his arms and then you do his dirty work for the rest of his life was not appealing to me as a feminist and to many others. And what I did was, with the help of Stephen Resnick and Richard Wolff, I explored a different way of applying Marxism by just asking 3 questions. So you can ask, who does the work in the household? Who gets to appropriate the fruits of that labor, to eat the dinners, to enjoy the cleanliness and order, and distribute it, invite his friends over to see a football game that you clean up after his friends? Wait a minute, that's feudalism. It's not medieval feudalism, it's modern feudalism. And women have been in a feudal position forever in history, not in matriarchal times, but in American history. And so I started applying that and realizing that Marxian class theory can take us over the threshold into the household. And that covers some of the position of women in the Soviet Union and satellite countries, where women were helped considerably with domestic work and childcare. But it was still an assignment by birth, because you're a woman. And that was because they needed population to create industry and wealth, and they needed people to be born. It wasn't because they saw how important it is for people, everyone, male and female, to be empowered, collectively empowered and personally empowered, and that we needed both, and that we needed the responsibilities of bringing up the next generation not to be foisted on women, which holds us back, but to be shared. And it is a class oppression that we endure as women, a class gender oppression, and that has to be addressed. And that began a sort of Marxian women's liberation. And that has been really developed recently by Jacinda Ardern, the 39-year-old
Prime Minister of New Zealand,
exactly, who's not married, has a child, and whose partner takes care of the baby while she's being prime minister. Great idea. At any rate, what she recently did is earth-shattering. She took women's jobs, which get lower pay all the time, like early childhood educators and nursery school teachers and those things, and cleaners and, healthcare workers, service workers, which were all lower paid. She had a whole study. What are the skills involved and how should they be compensated? And then changed the rules of pay so that people like therapists who do emotional labor and are therefore got less in New Zealand because it's associated with women's, quote, natural assignments, got a 30.5% raise. And women across the board got huge raises because their labor was seen and valued. One of the problems from which we suffered as feudal workers is if you assign labor by birth as a woman, then all you're doing is some genetic manifestation of yourself when you do hard work. It's not labor, and it doesn't have to be compensated. Big mistake. It's labor. It's sexual labor. It's emotional labor. It's social labor. It's childcare and physical labor and domestic labor, creating order and cleanliness, transforming raw materials of food into cooked meals and cleaning them up. That's labor, and it has to be compensated.
Yes, it has. It most definitely is. And I would say what is important about Jacinda Ardern is both these facts that in her personal life, she has chosen to question gender stereotypes, but that would have been enough, in my opinion, had it not been for this measure that she took. I mean, we don't need women that are just like the author of Lean In managers, but at the same time they become harsher bosses and managers than the men. We don't need another Margaret Thatcher that is highly praised in Romania, but was extremely violent economically. She is called in Great Britain, and many Romanians don't know that, but she is called Thatcher the milk snatcher because she eventually took the meals and the milk from children that were given a free meal in the school. And she was actually emphasizing extremely violent from the point of view of economic ideas. So it doesn't have to be a woman with a man's ideas, in my perspective.
That's right. It doesn't, because just because you have a vagina doesn't change your brain. That idea that women are always loving and giving, that's not true at all. The right wing in the United States includes a lot of women, and in everywhere else. But what I think the feminist movement has to do is say we are not doomed by being women to perform free domestic, emotional, social, and sexual labor for men. And there are a lot of men who want egalitarian, loving relationships, and they are our allies. And there are a lot of women who don't, and they are not our allies. And that in order for us all to have that, we need a class revolution in the household and outside of it. and we are together.
You know, your experience is so interesting since you are involved right from the beginning in this civil rights movement. I mean, you're a legend and a very powerful source of information for us here about in general. And I would like, because I heard you in your podcast discussing the way the CIA used its power to divide not only the feminist movement but also the Black Panthers. You discussed at some point that you wanted to organize an event with some representatives of the Black Panthers, and they were treating you so badly, saying that you are privileged and that you don't belong there, and so on and so forth. And that was the end of it. And while I would not like us to emphasize and to say that it's all CIA's fault, I think it's the elite's fault, because the CIA is mainly a tool, you know, that the elites used to divide the type of movement that was growing back in the 70s in the US.
Yes, and I think that's very important, because you have popular anger. Women were angry, and you can direct it towards men as a gender, or you could direct it towards social transformation. Just like in the United States now, we recently had an invasion of the Capitol building, aided from the inside, from fascists from the inside, that made it possible. And people's anger that they've been cheated out of decent jobs is turned towards refugees and women and Black people. Because you have the anger, you can turn it either way. And women were angry. And so that the FBI, in the case of the Panthers made a very stupid mistake. In order to advertise their militants, their first appearance in the city of New Haven was on the steps of the courthouse, where they posed with rifles and Black uniforms. So immediately the FBI joined the Panthers en masse, and they were responsible for torturing and killing someone, and then they got in trouble, and they also were savage towards us. We wanted to have a joint demonstration for the rights of a feminist in the Panther movement, Higgins, and they wanted to have one at the same time for a man, Bobby Seale. That's fine. Erica Huggins, Bobby Seale. And we found that we sent 2 representatives who wanted to go and work with them. They never came back with anything. We never heard anything. And because I was a leader and outspoken, they sent me to the Panthers meeting, and I see these 2 women sitting on these guys' laps. And I thought, whoa, this is not the these are not the negotiators we want. So I took over, and they were terrible to us. You know, we said, we will withdraw from this publicly. We will withdraw from a joint event unless you listen to us. We are equals in this march, and you negotiate with me as a representative of women's liberation. And we had a meeting of the activists on this at a woman's house. And this Panther guy came up to the door and he said, let me in. And we said, no, this is a women's only meeting. This is women's liberation. And he said, I used to stomp pussy. I used to stomp women's vaginas. He was threatening us. And I said, I'm so scared you'll get my pussy stomped. Get out of here, right? So he went downstairs and on a bullhorn was shouting insulting things about our sexuality. And he was an FBI agent, I think. I have no proof, but that's the way he would act. And we had a children's school. When the Panthers volunteered, these people were brutal to the children, so they had to be eliminated because it was an FBI operation. And then when they tortured and murdered a guy, in their midst who was an informant. We knew enough to say to them, they were buying bullets from someone we knew was an informer with the police. And I said to the head of the Panthers, me and my husband, watch out. We know he is an informant. He's a drug user, and they don't arrest him because they have him invade left things and report on who's involved. And they were so adventuristic, they didn't care. And eventually they tortured and murdered somebody and were put in jail. And we stayed away from them because even though we were the biggest leftists in the city, we could see that this was not a responsible group, but it was invaded by the FBI and a violent extremist group. And they were also very racist against white people. Black people have to unite with white people who support them because they are a minority. Everyone has to unite if you're going to have a class transformation. You need to have your own issues and make sure they're respected, but you need unity, class unity. They weren't interested in that at all. So that's what happened. And it made me appreciate the power of the FBI and CIA to subvert our movement. And Gloria Steinem is an excellent example of that. She's smart. She's beautiful, well-connected, brought in a lot of money. We never asked from where. We were so naive. And so our movement was subverted. And the majority women's movement in the United States is a movement for equality for women within a system of grotesque class inequality, because the class element has been excised.
Yes, this is exactly what I wanted you to emphasize, because, this is not like a conspiracy. It is mainly the way all kinds of power usually act. I mean, in a democracy, you are not a king to just cut off the head of the ones you don't like, but there are other means of social control.
Right.
And
cut
using
off money.
Exactly. Use influence through information, money, and all sorts of covert operations actually to do the same thing. And as you said, like taking out the class element from the feminist movement and also dividing the left, making it like some sort of corporation with departments. We have the Department of Anti-Racism. Now we have the Department of Anti-Racism, but of women who fight anti-racism, women of color. Then we have women, and you see these all little rooms, and people stay there in their little bubbles, and from time to time it's better to make them fight and
right.
Also to apply for grants, and to fight for resources, and this is how you divide the movement, because there's no conspiracy. I mean, if I were the head of the FBI, which I would probably never be, but this is the way I would do it. I mean,
yes, absolutely. That's what you would do. And that's what they did. And so what happened was the women's movement, because it lost its class element, became a movement for certain institutions to be established for women, so that they established rape crisis centers, great idea. Abortion clinics, fine idea. A movement to repeal abortion laws, fine idea. And battered women's shelters, fine idea. They pushed legislation and protection within the system. They cut out anything that challenges capitalist domination. And they created room at the top for women who want to compete at the top. And still in the United States, 43% of women's jobs are what they call pink collar jobs. They're jobs for women that are paid less. jobs in social connection between people, jobs in taking care of people. The lowest paid people are daycare workers. They're paid less than parking lot attendants, or home health aides that help sick people. These are what were women's traditional roles. And there hasn't been a class redress for these grievances. And that is a missing element of the feminist movement, which is very terrible because it cuts out the mass of American women. Hillary Clinton wanted to raise the minimum wage to $13.50. That's crazy. Women get lower salaries. She didn't care that 66% of minimum wage workers are women, but she pretended to be a feminist.
Also, yes, I'm meaning to talk to you about that, because in Ms.Magazine, I looked at the most recent articles that they wrote, and they were all cheering up for Kamala Harris. We are going to host an event here at the Baricada, where you are, of course, most welcome to join. But for our viewers, it's important because we are going to discuss in detail about that. But it is also the fact that I want you to address how Ms.Magazine still along the lines that Gloria Steinem, I think, has traced back in the 70s, wrote a couple of articles just cheering up for her being there, and for her being a woman in a top position. And while personally I may be happy for her, where there is no, what should I say, regulation, no law that she wrote to advance women's interests and to make the interest of the women her priority, I don't see why would I cheer up as a feminist.
Yeah, well, I think there are these two different streams in feminism. One is including women at all positions, no matter how exploitative and oppressive, is a victory for women. I remember organizing a picket line against women being in the military. And our signs were, "We are proud that we create life. We do not kill it. We don't want to be in your military." Now, if it were a revolutionary military, I'd want to be in it. But not the US, which has a defense system which just invades people. It doesn't defend the United States at all. It just aggresses against other countries. So, I think inclusion is not enough. You need transformation. You don't just want to be included in a terrible power structure that's class oppressive to the majority. And so there's a real debate, because the feminist movement became a movement for equality within a system of inequality. The United States in 1970 was the most equal, the most egalitarian nation of the developed world. It is now the least equal, even though we have a female vice president. So that's obviously not enough.
Yes, I would think that that's obviously not enough. As I told you just before we went live, that we have a feminist here in Romania, Sofia Nadejda, that wrote back in the 19th century, if rich women don't do anything for poor, or if rich men don't do anything for poor men, why would you expect that rich women are going to do everything for poor women? I mean, just because they are women, they are not going to do more for their peers than men do for their peers. So this is very important to keep in mind. What you talked about in one of your podcasts, you also talked about the revolution that's been going on in the United States, despite the fact that the FBI and then CIA and the elites went all the way through with this program of taking out the class element from the feminist struggle. There is a revolution in terms of women wanting to be alone by choice and choosing to be alone. Can you
Yes,
a little bit on that?
The United States has not had a class revolution anywhere else but in the household. But there, there has been a revolution. Because what happened was when the capitalists decided to make even more profit by exporting well-paid manufacturing jobs to countries that paid very little and had no ecological or weak ecological restrictions, like China, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, when they exported those jobs, which finally it was possible to do because they had fax machines, because they had computers. You didn't have to be on the same site of your manufacturing plant in order to control it. And so men's well-paid union jobs that they had fought and gotten union salaries were mainly exported to poor countries. And so men's economic dominance that they had, because they had a family wage, they could support dependent women as full-time domestic, sexual, and emotional servants. Well, now they wanted the same service, but now their women had to get out and work. The overwhelming number of women in the United States work outside the house as well as within it. Well, women didn't want that bargain, to have to work all day and then come back and do a second shift of housework, childcare, laundry, and so on. And men held on to their feudal privilege. If you notice the invasion of the Capitol of the United States on January 6th, almost all of those people who invaded were men who are very angry, white men, that they lost their privilege as white men, as whites and as men, and their control over women. The men's rights movement in the United States, which is a terrible movement, different fathers' rights is a very positive movement, allowing fathers and pushing that fathers have more of a role in their children's lives. Men's rights wants to repeal the 19th Amendment, allowing women to vote.
That figures, of course. We are not intelligent enough to choose the political leaders.
Yeah, because they say women vote, they want all sorts of social protections, Social Security in their old age, childcare, it's very expensive, we should cut that out. That's their argument. But we know what their real argument is. And what has happened is that now 70% of American divorces are initiated by women. Used to be men who did that. Now it's women. That the majority of American women are single and by choice. And women are more and more refusing to marry men who want them to do all the domestic work and take care of the children and who can't support and work too outside the household. So what was great for capitalism, which was exporting men's family wage jobs, they could lower the wages of everyone. Wages have been frozen in the United States since the late 1970s in terms of what you could actually buy with your wage. You now need 2 incomes to get anywhere near the standard of living that one male income earned between 1820 and the mid to late 1970s. So men are deserted. And women, when they're divorced or don't marry, they have the emotional skills. They bond with other women. They can bond with men if they feel like it. They talk to each other. They bond with their relatives. They bond with their children. Whereas men don't have those emotional skills. The male role deprives men of their emotional need for each other. They're allowed to need sex, but they're not allowed to need hugs and understanding and kindness and vulnerability and comfort. And so they're lost. That's why all the mass murderers, and we have about 2 a month in the United States of people who just go out and kill random people, they're all men, driven mad because they have no emotional permission and no emotional skills. And women don't want to put up with it anymore. And so they don't. So there has been a revolution in the household. Women are not getting married and taking on the whole domestic responsibility. And the poorer the women are, the less likely they'll be married, because a rich woman hires other women to do her housework, to do her cooking, to do her childcare, and so on, to do babysitting so she can go out with her husband, and to do couples counseling if her husband doesn't kind of understand her or want to. But poor women don't have that. And so now 42% of America's kids are born outside of a marriage, and 75% of America's kids live with one parent. 90%, no, it's 95%, it's the mother, for a good long period of their lives. That's a revolution, because women have given up feudal servitude in the household and demand to have a communist relationship in which it's each according to her ability, each according to his needs, where things are run like a co-op in the household, not like a factory with an overseer and a board of directors. And that's a revolution. But it hasn't been, the United States doesn't report on things with a class analysis, so it hasn't been remarked on much. People have remarked on women's independence. Someone like Rosen wrote why we don't need men, why men should be extinct, they're no longer necessary. But it isn't true. People need comfort and kindness and sexual connection, but they need it in the way that Alexandra Kollontai describes in her essay, Winged Eros. They need comradeship, they need solidarity, they need values connection, and they need shared labor, emotional, social, sexual labor. And that's a revolution that American women are demanding that, or opting out and just doing their own domestic labor and their own childcare and bonding with each other around doing this. And so that men are much more lost in the United States than women, which is why they are doing many more mass murders, invading the Capitol, and being in these very extremist groups. There are some women who are into that too, as we know, but they're a tiny minority, which you could see if you look at the January 6th invasion of the US Capitol.
Yes, a lot of angry men, and some of them looked quite. The one with the horns, here in Romania, just after the holidays, especially after New Year's Eve, we have this habit of men dressing up like animals with horns and going from house to house. And it was quite a joke that they went there trying to mimic the Romanian tradition, maybe the ancient Romanian tradition. Okay. Well, it was quite hilarious. From here, from the other side of the earth, it was quite hilarious, but at the same time, quite scary. I would like us to go back a little bit to what happened in Eastern Europe, because it is so important that here, of course, we got a lot of rights. And especially we got rights, and it is important to notice if some of our viewers are not from Eastern Europe and maybe they would like to follow the interview because they are your fans, that here we had a lot of economic rights that were granted in the western part of the world later, starting from 1945, and as early as that was the equal pay. There was no problem, that women were paid less, or that having a law, because especially in Great Britain, I read a book about men complaining that women should never be paid as much as they were because they have to support the family, and they were writing long, hilarious letters on how women should not be given the same amount of money. We didn't have that, and we had maternity leave, and we had a lot of help with the childcare, and a lot of help in terms of domestic labor. But somehow, exactly as you said, unfortunately, feminism, and paradoxically, feminism was considered bourgeois, and feminism was considered retrograde, and feminism was considered something that capitalists would, emphasize. So this is why there was no discussion on feminism, because they would say, well, you have access to the job market, you have a lot of support with domestic labor, but there is something missing here. Just as you said, they never questioned the fact that the women had to be the ones that had to do all this work.
That's right. Women had two jobs. And the problems were what is called natalism, which is you have to give birth to citizens. Now, I understand after World War II, during World War II, the Soviet Union lost 14% of its population, 30 million people. But that, and they needed employment, they needed to build up industry. But they didn't give people paternity leaves so that men have to stay home with their babies. And in some countries like Norway, they have a forced paternity leave. So men don't get extra credit for going back to work because they don't take paternity leave. And you see a lot more people in Sweden, Denmark, Norway, Iceland, Greenland, all those places. Fathers are much more involved. So that you not only need access to employment and also access to having a child with support, but you need to make children, both parents' children, not just the women's. Women have to be freed from the exclusive burden of domestic labor, or else we'll never be on par with men because we'll have two jobs while they have one. And the Eastern European countries did not address that, did not make a revolution across the threshold into the household. And to really empower all your citizens, you need a revolution in your personal life as well as your economic life outside the house. And that's very important.
Yes, I would think so. But let us now discuss a very interesting fact. I mean, we have this revolution, especially in the western part of the world, but now here in Romania too, there is no problem to get a divorce and nobody looks at you like you're some kind of freak because you got a divorce. Like my mother tells me it was the case during the time she was young.
My mother too.
Well, it was, and she told me because she got a divorce and it was quite unusual, even though there was a horrifying case of domestic violence, but everybody said to her, you should stay there. And even the women, and it was the mentality that you had to stay there and endure. Well, not anymore. Especially, let's say, at least in the cities, at least in the places where women can get where they can get jobs and they are financially stable. But the problem is that we see rises in prostitution, especially Romania. I don't know if you knew that but we are number one among the countries with the most video chat workers, because we have a lot of educated young women and a good internet connection. There is nothing to be, it is the economic, it has an economic basis. The fact that we enjoyed and we still enjoy pretty good public schools where a lot of students get a good education, even though that is being debatable because a lot of our education system is in decay. After 1989, it went from bad to worse, but still it offers this possibility. And we have a very good internet connection and providers of internet. So while I see here some sort of capitalist revolution, so we went to feudalism to capitalism and to make parts of our work, especially sex work, exploitable. So maybe we need more, because while I think in terms of individual success, it may prove very a lucrative business. You can earn a lot being a video chat worker, and I'm not shaming anyone because they can achieve success financially, but I don't see it as a class liberation. I don't see how this is a way for the whole women to become liberated. You can gain individual emancipation through going through that road, but I don't see we can get class liberation through that type of.
No, and you can't get equal wages through that. Sex work, at least in the United States, is the most lucrative, the most money making that a woman can get. And women's salaries are less than men's. And a lot of women go into sex work because our sex education is almost non-existent. We have 50 states. Only 17 states have any biologically correct sex education. And unlike Scandinavia, it's not sexuality education that teaches men and women both to enjoy their sexuality, to know what it is, to feel entitled to have an orgasm, to know what produces an orgasm, and to enjoy it, so that sex becomes something that men want and women shy away from because it's dangerous and they'll be exploited. And so it becomes a commodity that you can sell. And that's why in the United States, a big area of the sex trades is called the sugar industry, where women find women who are young and attractive, find a rich man to pay their tuition at college or graduate school and support them in exchange for having what they call a GFE, a girlfriend experience. So when he comes to town on business, they pay attention to him, they listen to him. He can take them to a business convention where they can talk very intelligently and look good, and his fellow businessmen can feel he's lucky. But, you know, and what the woman gets is two things within our gender landscape. She gets free tuition and often free room and board. And I should parenthetically say that in private universities like NYU, to get, you can't get out of college without a $248,000 bill for your 4-year college. And you'll be in debt the rest of your life, or at least 20 years to pay it off. So you can't get a job in anything that doesn't make a lot of money, or you're just finished. So women are pushed into this. And also they don't want to be in relationships where someone wants to marry them, have a child, and then they'll be home taking care of the child and they won't have a career, so that it has that benefit. And for rich men, they have the perks, the privileges of being with a young woman who makes no demands for marriage. And they don't have to negotiate, change gender terrain and treat her like an equal, because he's paying, he's comfortable. Rich men are comfortable as long as they're paying. They think when they give their money, they're giving themselves. So they're happy with this. And the negotiation between them is between them. Either one can break the arrangement if they want to. So that more and more women in the United States are in the sugar industry. It's a perfect example of what happens with capitalist exploitation, what happens to women, when the only way they can make really good money and not be indebted for the rest of their lives in school, unless they have very rich parents. They're that 10% of the population who could afford to pay their kids' tuition without a problem. Well, unless they're there, that's an unattractive option for many women. And it's a perfect example of what capitalism does.
Well, it may have a progressive element to it because women have more freedom. We have to accept in this system, as compared to the traditional family in the 19th century, when they didn't have the right to work, to vote, to do anything else but to care for the children and the husband. But at the same time, I hope for more. And I think all feminists should fight for more, because while it may be a progress, it is still far from being enough.
Far from being enough. We're not equals, and we're not equals in a society that is nurturing to us and in which we have some control over our lives. a real
Yes,
democracy.
So, Harriet, we've been talking for almost an hour. I wouldn't take much of your time, but if you would be now like the president of the United States, what would be the first three things that you would do?
Well, I would certainly convert our $1 trillion military budget towards very much towards the quality of life for men and women in America. And I would use Jacinda Ardern's formula so that women would be paid as well as men. And I would also include the reforms that were done in the socialist countries. Good childcare and after school care and summer care and good restaurants where people can go very cheaply with their families. Look, they said people won't want communal kitchens in the United States, but there's 2 billion hamburgers sold a year at McDonald's, so we know that isn't true. If you had attractive, nutritious restaurants with playgrounds for kids outside, I would do that. I would have big communal laundries so men and women could drop off their laundry and pick it up during the day, and it would be subsidized. I would do all of those things, industrialize housework, so that a group of people hired would go through the block and clean everybody's house, of course, and have generous maternity leaves and compulsory paternity leaves as well. I would do that. Those would be the things that I would do right away to take care of personal life. And the military would also take care of a lot of sexism because every third woman in the military is raped. Because it's a whole macho culture and terrible for women. So there's, a lot of work to be done here.
Yes, I would think so. And I would also change, I don't know, the military I would put them, because here in Romania, they were forced to do some sorts of social work. How that I have to explain, like they worked in construction and they would build like social houses. And they were, because you have to give them something to do. I mean, you take away their, toys like tanks and bombs, and you have to give them something to play with, because otherwise they are going to go to the Capitol for another round of, playing with.
Right. A lot of those people who invaded the Capitol were military person. 1 in 5 were people who were involved with the military. But also, I noticed on your chat that they say that they agree with Mrs. Fraad. I'm not Mrs. Fraad. I'm either Dr. Fraad or Harriet Fraad, but I'm not Mrs. Fraad.
Mrs. Fraad. And they are saying hello also to your husband, the dear Professor Wolf. I've been watching his show a lot. His shows, and maybe sometimes we'll get the chance to discuss with him also, because he managed to build quite an audience, especially here in Eastern Europe.
Good. He shares my views on this, and we wrote that book together. The latest version of that book is called Class Struggle on the Home Front. And we wrote that together because he too is committed to this Marxism and also this revolution in the household.
Yes, this is very important. Thank you very much. Maybe you have something to add or something I haven't thought about and you wanted to say for the Eastern European viewers.
Well, I want to say that you need your revolution to be a revolution in women's rights as human beings, and not to have gender discrimination in terms of children and in terms of housework, domestic work, sexual work, and emotional work, because that will build a true equality.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So it's wonderful to talk to you. Good to talk to you.
Good to talk to you. Okay, I'm going to finish right now.
Send me a link. Send me a link so I'll put it on my website, okay?
Of course, I'll send you. But once we finish, we can stay for a few minutes more. I will end the transmission now. Thank you very much for watching. For me, it was a treat, and I think it was also from you, judging from the comments. Thank you very much, and we'll see you all on Sunday. Don't forget to go to our Patreon page and to support us, because independent journalism doesn't have the support of big oligarchs or corporate money. So we count on you. Thanks for watching and keep fighting. Bye.